Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the CRICKETher Vodcast. Yesterday we were at the RHF Bowl for one of the final round of RHF Trophy matches, Sid. Now we already knew who the finalists were going to be, but that match yesterday between Vipers and Diamonds was quite important, wasn't it?
Yeah, so we knew that Vipers, Diamonds and Sparks were going to qualify for the knockout stages, but we didn't know what order they were going to be in. One team to qualify directly through to the final. Now what happened in the end was that Sparks were beaten by Lightning. A little bit of a surprise result, but obviously a fantastic performance by the Bryce sisters, put on 200 runs between them, and that made Sparks' life very difficult that day. It's always the case with cricket that if you have one brilliant performance, then it will make your life hard. Two brilliant performances, then it's going to be really tough. So Sparks didn't win their game, which meant that it was a sort of straight fight between Vipers and Diamonds to see who would qualify directly for the final. The game kind of undulated a bit, didn't it? Bess Heath played a fantastic innings. She was really good. She scored runs quickly. She came in quite late when it looked like Diamonds were going to kind of trundle along to quite a low total, and she really changed the game and made it quite difficult for the Vipers. But the Vipers, largely kept wickets intact. Maya Boucher put in a performance, and Georgia Adams got another second consecutive 50. But really, it was all about Georgia Elvis, wasn't it, Raf? She was really great.
Yeah, she was fantastic, and it was great to speak to her afterwards and just reflect on the fact that she is kind of now this senior player with a whole kind of ream of experience, and in the last couple of Vipers games has really been able to guide them through a couple of quite difficult run chases. So it's and it's so nice to see her doing well because she's such a lovely person, if I may say so. I thought that one of the issues for Diamonds actually was that they were missing a couple of their really key bowlers. We're unsure whether it was kind of related to injury or availability, but they didn't have either Jenny Gunn or Katie Levick playing for them. So it will be a question about whether they are available for the sort of second, third place match on Wednesday, which is going to be in Scarborough, hosted by the Diamonds, and or the final on Saturday indeed. And I think that they could be very important because really it did feel yesterday like Diamonds really missed them. And Georgia Elvis afterwards, who I got to speak to, got to get some quotes from, she actually said it was a deliberate strategy on the part of Vipers. We knew that it was okay to start a bit slowly and kind of see off the opening bowlers, because we then knew that they didn't have a couple of key bowlers available, and that therefore that meant that we could kind of just get the runs that way off their slightly kind of second string bowlers, I suppose. And it worked for Vipers. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens in those last couple of matches. But obviously Vipers through to the final. Sid, are you, as a Vipers fan, are you feeling confident?
Oh well, I think it's been a much tougher competition this year, hasn't it? And the Vipers, would they rather face Sparks? Well, Sparks have beaten them twice in this year already. Thank God the final's not at Hove, because Sparks beaten the Vipers twice at Hove. That would not be a good precedent. We'll be at Northampton instead. But Sparks have got some great players, and Eve Jones and Marie Kelly are both in the best form of their lives. So you wouldn't. That's not going to be an easy game. The Diamonds also beat the Vipers in the semi-final of the Charlotte Edwards Cup, so they've got a little bit of a hold over them as well. So whoever it is, I think there's going to be some good cricket played. I still think overall the Vipers are the best team, but they are missing some key players. It would be wonderful if England were to release Charlie Dean and Danny Wyatt for the final. They did release Lauren Winfield last year, so there's precedent, guys.
There was a plea there to Lisa Kitely.
but seriously, no, it's going to be a fantastic game. If you're anywhere Northampton next Saturday, get yourself up there.
Or down there, depending on which bit of the country you're coming from.
Absolutely.
Okay, now changing tack slightly, we're actually here at Worcester. I don't know if you can tell by the backdrop. Today it's the second ODI between England and New Zealand. England won the first match, of course, at Bristol, reasonably easily, although there was a bit of a kind of New Zealand hoo-ha at the end, whereby Leah Tahuhu and Lee Kasprick looked like they might possibly be about to upset things, but fortunately for the sake of my match report, it went England's way in the end. So based on the fact that England won the last game, Sid, do you think they're likely to make any changes today?
I think England will definitely be making some changes. Look, we've got 5 ODIs in the space of 11 days, is it? England's schedule isn't quite as chaotic as ours because we've got the RHF games as well. We're doing 7 games in 11 days, but that's still a lot of cricket, and I think they're almost certainly going to rotate, and it will be very much about rotation, I think. So if we don't see Lauren Winfield today, it won't be because she's been dropped. It's been because she's been rotated. Same, England might be bringing Tash Farrant in. Again, that'll be a rotation thing, but it'll be a chance to look at all those players. And of course, a key one there, talking about looking at players, is Charlie Dean. Raf, what do you think is going to happen there?
Oh, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I don't think that there would be any case for dropping her based on how she did in the debut, but it might be, as you say, a bit of a case of player rotation. I was really encouraged by how she did on debut. It was interesting that at one point Charlotte Edwards, who presented her with her cap before play started, which was a really nice touch because obviously Lottie's been her kind of coach and mentor at Hampshire and Southern Vipers for many years and has really talked her up for England, and was now very, very proud, almost like a kind of parental
moment, almost,
yeah, a little bit, yeah. But when she was sat in the press box for a bit because she was between commentary stints, and Charlie Dean was kind of bowling her first overs in international cricket, and she was clearly really nervous. I mean, Lottie was clearly really nervous, but Charlie Dean wasn't nervous, actually, crucially. I mean, she probably was inside, but she didn't show it. She looked confident. She's quite a quiet player, I'd say. She's not kind of really sort of confident and brash, kind of, which is how I might describe Alice Capsey a bit more, and I think that can be quite difficult, therefore, coming into the England setup for your first match, and there's always going to be nerves. But she kind of composed herself really well. She held herself really well. She didn't take a wicket for the first few overs, but I was going to write anyway that I thought that she'd performed admirably. And then what was really nice to see actually was then that Heather Knight, kind of towards the end of the game, when England knew basically that they'd won the match, they brought her back on, and they kind of almost said, this is an invitation to take a wicket or a couple of wickets at a period of the game when New Zealand are going to be really going at it because they know that they have to. And she was able to pick up an international wicket, and your first international wicket's always really special. I think it was kind of important for her as an important moment because it gives you confidence then going into your next England game. So I thought that was good player management from Heather there, actually. So I don't know if we'll see her again today, but if we don't, then it's no real slight on her, and I think that she looked quite at home. Okay, and we're coming towards the end of the season for us. You've just hinted there that the next few days are going to be a bit hectic, Sid. But once this kind of next 10 days or so is over and done with, and we're collapsing, what is England's winter going to look like?
Well, there's some interesting questions there, aren't they? So England is supposed to be going to Pakistan quite shortly in October. Now, we've had some developments on that front in a sense this week because New Zealand men were in Pakistan. They were ready to play a series and they pulled out almost literally at the last minute. For once, that last minute thing isn't hyperbole. It was all ready to go, and they decided that they'd had some security information come through, and they decided not to go ahead with the matches, and the players are now flown out of Pakistan. So there was a lot of controversy on Twitter. Obviously, Pakistan fans were very disappointed. The local fans were very disappointed that they didn't go ahead. There were some people saying on Twitter, that New Zealand haven't actually produced what the security information was. The Pakistan authorities also kind of hinted that New Zealand hadn't told them what the security information was. Okay, so first of all, I think that there almost certainly was a security situation. I don't think that's something that you pull out. Not at that point in the, if they pulled out, with 4 weeks to go, then maybe, you go, well, they didn't want to go or something. But it does really sound like there was a security situation. It's not that if your security services tell you there's a security situation, they don't then go, and the security situation will announce to the press is this. And I suspect they have actually almost certainly told the right people in the Pakistan government for the security kind of clearance that will be needed. But obviously that would not have been passed on necessarily to the cricketing authorities because, again, you don't pass on that security information. So
does this have any relevance for England women?
Does it have relevance for England women? Absolutely, yes it does, because the England women are supposed to be going there shortly. Heather Knight said last week that she was still basically looking forward to going there, and she was still expecting to do so. Are they still going to go? Well, the ECB were asked that, because obviously the men are supposed to be going as well. They said they'd make an announcement within 24 to 48 hours. We haven't had that announcement. We might well get that today. My feeling is that they're probably not going to go now, and I feel sorry for the fans in Pakistan, and but the security situation there obviously is a very evolving situation on the ground, and I think that's the right call to make. So that's Pakistan, but England were then supposed to be going on to the Women's Ashes in Australia, and there have kind of been developments related to that this week as well. Obviously India, they're at the moment just about to start their series, but also the cricket authorities in Australia have finally acknowledged, despite having said for months that the WBBL will go ahead as normal, they finally acknowledged that that's not going to be possible for the first 2 weeks at least. They're going to play the first 2 weeks in Hobart, so all 8 teams are flying to Tasmania. Will the rest of the competition take place? They're still saying that it will take place as scheduled. That sounds pretty unlikely to me. I think that we're going to see the entire WBBL played in Hobart. And then England are supposed to be flying out for the Women's Ashes. Raf, what's going to happen there? What do you think that is going to look like?
Well, it's a fool's errand, isn't it, to try and guess what's going to be happening with COVID in a few months' time. England aren't meant to be flying out to Australia until January. It's who knows? It's anyone's guess. I think that, to be honest, though, given that the Delta variant does seem to have kind of got into Australia, we've learnt from our own personal experience here in the UK. It's very difficult to stamp down, to stamp out once it gets to you, because it's so infectious. So my feeling is that actually to say that everything in Australia is going to be back to normal by January would be very optimistic. Sorry for any Australians who are watching and thinking I'm being a pessimist. But I'm just trying to be realistic. I think that it would be actually irresponsible of Cricket Australia and the ECB not to be sitting down and going, right, what's our plan B for the Women's Ashes? Is it going to be as similar to what's happened with the India tour? Is it going to end up whereby the Women's Ashes all have to be played in one state, for example, to avoid these kind of periods of necessary quarantine trying to travel between states? I mean, the Women's Ashes simply isn't long enough for that to be feasible. So hopefully they are kind of sitting down trying to work that out. There's actually, though, an even more worrying question about what happens with the World Cup. I actually sat down the other day and worked this out for the first time, and between England's and Australia's last Women's Ashes match and their opening game of the World Cup, which is obviously being played against each other, there are 13 clear days. Now, New Zealand's standard of quarantine and the kind of universal standard of quarantine is 14 days. So it's actually not, with the current schedule, it's not logistically feasible for them to quarantine, even if they were literally to go right from the last match and fly into New Zealand. So something is going to have to give. Is it going to be the World Cup schedule? Is it going to be the Women's Ashes schedule? I suspect it's more likely to be the Women's Ashes schedule, because it's easier to reorganise something for 2 teams than it is for 8 teams in the World Cup, but something is going to have to be done. And I have to say, if I was the New Zealand or the Indian teams in particular, I'd be positively licking my lips at this, because it does look a bit like what's going to happen is that England and Australia are basically going to have to go straight from a period of quarantine into playing in their first World Cup match and the rest of the tournament without any warm-up fixtures, without any real time for training or to get any handle on the conditions. So a really big opportunity there to knock out those top 2 teams kind of early in the competition, I would say. So yeah, the schedule was obviously predicated on this idea that you'd be able to travel between Australia and New Zealand without any quarantine, which you were able to do for a period, weren't you? But now not so much, and the New Zealand government have been very cautious, understandably so. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, rightly so. And I think that there's a little bit of an extent to which it feels like the cricketing authorities are going, shall we take COVID into account? Or maybe COVID will just disappear. No, guys, it's not going to disappear. It's still going to be there, and there's going to be, a hard collision if you don't take that into account, particularly with the New Zealand government's zero COVID approach. The New Zealand government have said privately to people off the record, we've heard off the record that people are being told, the World Cup will go ahead. The New Zealand government are going to make every effort to ensure that happens. It's their absolute priority for sport in New Zealand for the next year. But there are going to have to be steps taken.
Yeah. and they will probably argue it's not their problem that England and Australia have set up a bilateral series to go ahead straight beforehand. Anyway, we'll have to see. So basically the answer to what will England's winter look like is we don't really know. In other news this week, Sid, Mankadding has been in the news very much, hasn't it? After
Raf, are you sure there shouldn't be women cadding?
Well, it depends, Sid, doesn't it? Anyway.
Sorry.
Cameroon bowler Maeva Duma has kind of shot to fame overnight after she mancadded not one, not two, not three, but 4 Ugandan players in Cameroon's fixture v Uganda. So that's very much been in the news, being talked about. Sid, you've got some views on this?
Yeah, I mean, having views on mancadding is a dangerous thing to do. You know, you find out on social media that you know, you discuss mancadding and suddenly, you know, half the world, whichever side you come down on, half the world thinks you're a terrible person. And, you know, this feels like there's a new scale of evil where you've got, like, you know, Osama bin Laden, Adolf Hitler, that bloke on Twitter that talked about mancadding. But, you know, I think that the real issue with mancadding actually is, you know, if we kind of step away from the controversy, the real issue is that what we're trying to do obviously is protect against the striker kind of taking the mickey, the non-striker taking the mickey and, you know, running halfway up the pitch. But the problem is that the punishment, you know, is like far in excess of the crime. So the crime is, you know, stealing a couple of yards. The punishment is you lose your entire wicket. Most people agree that punishment is too harsh, which is why almost everybody thinks that you should issue a warning before you actually mancad somebody. What I think we need to do is cut the entire Gordian knot and, you know, get rid of the issue completely by introducing us a very different kind of a rule, which doesn't make a huge amount of difference to the way the game is played. I think we should have a new law that says at the moment the ball leaves the bowler's hand, if the non-striking batsman is not in their crease at the bowler's end, then no runs can be scored off that delivery. It's not a no ball or anything, it's still a legitimate delivery, but you can't score any runs on it. So whatever happens, if you tonk it into the stands for 6, you get no runs because the non-striking batter was out of their crease. What do you think of that as a way of cutting through, Raf?
I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but it does add a layer of complexity, and of course it would only ever be possible in matches where you had a third umpire, because the umpires on the ground wouldn't be able to look out for that. I mean, they can barely spot no balls. The umpire behind the stumps is meant to be looking down to see the trajectory of the ball. They're not going to be able to kind of spot when somebody's out of their ground at the non-striker's end. So for most matches, other than kind of very top internationals, it wouldn't be feasible really, would it? We've only recently had DRS introduced in women's international cricket. Obviously now all of the England women's home internationals are played with DRS, but that's been a very recent development. So it just strikes me that it wouldn't necessarily solve the problem. It would create another problem, which is that you need more DRS and you need more third umpire technology. It certainly wouldn't have made a difference to Cameroon v Uganda because I'm pretty sure that they didn't have TV reviews available to them in that match. So interesting solution, but not really workable. Sorry, Sid.
Okay, well, if you've got a better solution, tell us all about it below the line or on Twitter or whatever. Okay, well, that's that for this week, I believe. So we're off to watch the cricket. The bells of the cathedral are ringing out for the service this morning. We'll be going to our own service at the Worcester County Cricket Ground. We'll see you next week.
Bye.